The 7 letters to the 7 churches represent a complete gospel message to the universal church or Christendom. These letters constitute the foundation for the entire book of Revelation, not just as a historical portrait of the first century church, but of the types of conditions in the universal church until the end of time. The first letter is written to the church of Ephesus. Ephesus means desirable, and it was located at the mouth of the Cayster River facing the Aegean Sea. It had one of the finest harbors in the world and was a main commercial center for the coast of Western Asia. It was also a gateway to the province for the Roman officials. Today, the city lies about 5 miles inland due to a buildup of silt from the river, and with the loss of the port in the 4th century, the city gradually lost its significance over time. But when Revelation was written, it was the place to be. Stamped coins found in the ruins bear the words, "the first of the greatest," and the first and greatest metropolis in Asia. This city had one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Diana, a huge and magnificent structure that would have been located close to the harbor. Other temples of various emperors were in the city, as well as the Celsus Library, the 3rd largest library in the empire that could house up to 12,000 scrolls, the facade of which still stands today. Ephesus was blessed by the ministry of Paul, Apollos, Timothy, and John, and was likely the place where the mother of Jesus lived until her death, as John was entrusted with her care. Due to the commercial and religious significance of this town, the work that started here quickly spread abroad, symbolic of the church in the 1st century. This church receives perhaps one of the best commendations a church ever receives. "I know your works, your labor, and your patience, how you cannot bear those who are evil, and you've tested those who say they are apostles and are not." They were a hard-working church, preaching the gospel fervently. They were vigilant about doctrinal purity, for during this time period, they were told to beware of wolves coming into the church in sheep's clothing. The church was also told that they were persevering, hard-working, and did not become weary. But they were rebuked for leaving their first love, either first in time, as in their conversion, or first in prominence, as in Jesus needed to be first. Hard-working for God, but they had lost their love of Him and other people.
Well, good morning. Anybody here ready and glad to be here and ready to learn about Jesus? Come on, a little better than that. Tell Jesus you love Him. We're going to dive in. It's going to be a great series. I'm looking forward to it. As we get into it, though, I saw an article about a week and a half ago, something like that. And in this article, they had tested college students from today, and they were trying to measure the level of empathy amongst modern college students. They've been measuring this actually for quite some time. What was interesting in this article, though, is as they did their tests and their studies, what they discovered is that college students today are 40% less empathetic than they were in 1970. In other words, they are far less empathetic than they used to be. And interesting, there were some questions that stood out as they were polling these students that they scored particularly low on. And I wanted to highlight these today because I think it was really interesting. Some of those questions they scored low on was, "Other people's misfortunes do not usually disturb me a great deal." Another one of the questions that stood out, "I sometimes try to understand my friends better by imagining how things look from their perspective," which is literally empathy defined right there, and they scored very low on that. And another one is, "I often have tender, concerned feelings for people less fortunate for me." In each case, the scores were considerably lower than past generations, so there has been a decline of empathy. Another group did a similar study, sociologists, and in their studies where they came to very similar conclusions, they ended up asking an important question. They said, what happens if nobody has any natural or general responsibility or obligation to help other people? That they are innocent of any guilt, and if they ignore other people in need? And that's a good question. What happens in our culture, in our society, if we become a people who lack empathy for other people? What would that culture, what would that society look like? In this study, in fact, of young adults, it found that there were 5 driving factors to this lack of empathy. These really caught my eye. Confused moral reasoning, routine intoxication, materialistic life goals, regrettable sexual experiences, and in disengagement from civic and political life. And I want to point out, this was not a Christian study. These were sociologists. Each of these were drivers for a loss, and a noticeable loss, of empathy in the last 50 years in our culture. And I think we have to stop and we have to ask, are we a little bothered by that? What would a culture without empathy and love look like? We start the new series today. We call it Letters to the Church. And it started with me asking a question that says, what would it look like if Jesus wrote Radiant Church a letter? What would he say? In fact, the more disturbing question I had to ask myself is like, would I want to read it? You know what I mean? Would that be something I'd even want to hear? And that's what's going on here in the book of Revelation. John is conveying 7 letters to 7 churches. These churches are all located in what we'd call modern-day Turkey. They were all located on a Roman highway, a well-known Roman highway. They were each about 35 to 40 miles apart, so it was about a full day's walking journey to each one. Each of these churches represented influential forces in the area they were at. In other words, they were a prominent church in a prominent city that helped influence the areas around them. The first one we're going to look at is this church in Ephesus, and it's no wonder that it would be the first one mentioned, because the church of Ephesus also was the closest to where the Apostle John was. The Apostle John at the time was exiled to an island called Patmos. As he wrote him, he sent it off with a messenger. The nearest city, large city with a port, would have been Ephesus, as you can see there on the map. This is a church that John also knew well. He had lived there for several years. As mentioned in the video, he had relocated Jesus' mother there, where she probably died. Paul had started and planted a church there somewhere around AD 54. It was an exciting, vibrant church that grew very quickly and planted many other churches in the area. It was very influential. And when Paul left this church as the pastor, it was such a big, influential, important church that he sent his protégé, Timothy, there to be the pastor of that church. In fact, it's fair to say, just kind of give you perspective, around AD 70, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and that had been the center of authority and power for the Christian church in its early years. When Jerusalem was destroyed, much of that moved over, particularly into Ephesus, which was the largest city in Asia Minor at the time. So it was an important area for just the church as a whole. The second thing, though, I want to make that's extremely important we understand in all of these letters that are written is to keep this in mind. These are not letters from John to the churches. These are letters of Jesus to the churches. John is the one writing it down, but he's writing down the very words of Jesus. This is what Jesus has to say to the churches. And as I thought back, and I'm like, well, if Jesus had something to say to a church, wouldn't I want to pay attention to that? Wouldn't I want to learn what that is? I mean, what does Jesus think about church? What does he think about how they should act, what they should do, what they shouldn't do? And that's what this is. We get to see a piece of Jesus in these 7 letters and how he views his church. So today, let's dive in to this first letter to this first church in Ephesus. As we go to chapter 2, verse 1, if you have your Bible, you can go to there. We always put the verses up on the screen so you can follow along any way you're comfortable. we open it up, he says, to the angel of the church of Ephesus, write. Now, if you're like me and you read, that would immediately stop me in my studies, because the first question I'd be like, what angel? Like, what? Are you saying churches have angels? What's going on here? And the answer is quite possibly yes. We know that there are angels who watch over us. It makes sense since church is people, not a building, right? That there certainly could be angel of the church. But in this case, there's probably a more practical meaning of what's going on here, because when we look at the word angel, in its purest form in the Greek, it simply means messenger. That's what it means. It's just, don't add to it. It literally means, angel means messenger. Now, I get it, though, when we hear the word angel, because angels are often messengers from God, right? That's where they come from. So we automatically think, we see this, we automatically think, there's wings, there's halos, glowing lights, and supernatural stuff. That's how we see angels. But that's probably not what they're talking about here. First off, when he says church, that's not even the right word. Ekklesia is the right word there in the Greek, which means a gathering. But more importantly, it talks about a messenger who cries out for people to gather. And why that's important is it is a messenger who goes out. That's the imagery in Greek. A rider would ride through a city calling out names of people, where to meet, when to meet, why to meet, and they would gather. And so this is a letter to that messenger to share. Also, at this time, oftentimes the Christian church and the synagogue were still somewhat doing life together. It was still, most congregations were half Gentile, half Jewish. The split of this wouldn't happen for about another 20 or 30 years on that, with the revolt of the Bar Yochva revolt in the 120s. But until this time, they were doing life together. And one of the things you might want to know in synagogue worship is there's an actual position in the church called messenger. That's literally what it's called, messenger. And that person's job is to read scripture and also any letters that may come into the church from the outside. So a common sense answer here on this, and this is why I always say dive a little deeper when you're doing your study. He's saying to the messenger of the church. Quite possibly the word we would use today would be pastor. To the pastor of the church in Ephesus. He continues. These are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. And again, if you're a curious sort, what's the next question you're going to ask? What are these stars? What are these lampstands? But here we're going to learn a great principle, and we're learning this as we're walking through in Escaping Babylon as well, which is our podcast that we have throughout the week. You know what's so interesting is where the podcast has landed right now, and we've gone into Revelation, we're actually going to be in Ephesus next week. And you might be thinking, hey, you planned that really well. And I really didn't. This is seriously an accident that we landed in the same spot. But that's going to allow us to take an even deeper dive this week into that. And by the way, we're still enjoying that being spread out there. We exceeded 5,600 subscribers this week on that, which is really cool. The Lord has really expanded that. So, these are the words and the 7 stars and the 7 golden lampstands. One of the principles we learn about the book of Revelation is if you don't know what something means, either read ahead a little bit or go back a little bit because it's probably there. You will oftentimes see in the book of Revelation where it will say, the angel will ask John, what does this thing mean? And John will look at him and say, I don't know, you know, and then they'll explain it. Or it'll be somewhere nearby. Same case here. All you have to do is go back about 3 verses or so in the last chapter, very last verse in Revelation 1:20, and Jesus tells us what it is. Jesus says, the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and of the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So you can already see there, Jesus explains to them what it means. And the point he's making as he gets started with his church, and he's reminding them of this, is I am both the king and I am the high priest of the church. That's what we see in Revelation chapter 1 as he's introducing himself. We see this person introduced with a golden sash. That is a sign of kingship. We see them wearing a long robe. That is a sign of the high priest. They have the lampposts. They have the 7 stars. The point Jesus is making is this. I am the head of the church. And I think churches do forget that over time. That this church was purchased by the blood of Jesus Christ, and he is therefore not only king, but he is the high priest. May we never forget this is not our church, this is his church in all that we do. What's the next point he makes to them? I know your deeds. I didn't get very far in that verse because I stopped right there, and it's a great reminder. That thing you're doing in the dark, when nobody's looking. That thing you think nobody else sees, that you're hiding. A universal truth that weaves itself throughout the entire body or the Bible is God sees it. God knows it. You cannot hide from God. And right here at the beginning of the verse, he says, I know your deeds, both good and bad. God sees everything. And so what does he say? I know your deeds, your hard work and your perseverance. I know you can't tolerate wicked people, that you've tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and you've found them to be false. You've persevered and you've endured hardships for my name, and you've not grown weary. Man, if we got that letter from Jesus, that would be a really good day. I'd love that. That's praise the Lord. Great job, team. You've worked hard. You've persevered through hardships. You've not grown weary. Same word for working hard there, by the way, is in the Greek word discipled. You have discipled people, in other words. You've done a great thing. And what we can read between the lines is this: it's clearly an educated group of people. How do I know that? Because they have fought false apostles, false teachers, false messages. And this I know: if you want to confront false messages, false teachers, false preachers, you better have a good grounding in the Scripture and the knowledge of God. You have to be firmly rooted in the truth if you are going to confront the schemes of the devil. And so what's clear here is that this is a group of people that have knowledge. They are educated. They know the Bible. But can I give you a warning? It's possible to have the head knowledge and be missing the heart. You can be filled with all sorts of knowledge and truth, but lacking in love. In fact, I'll just tell you this: some of the smartest Christians I know are some of the meanest Christians I've ever met. They've got the knowledge. They can argue with you on anything, and they're right. They can quote Scripture on demand. King James Version, of course. Right? You'll find them on social media with their long rants and their anger. They got the head knowledge, but something's missing here. And so it should be no surprise then what Jesus says next. Revelation 2:4. Yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first. Another translation says neglected. Another one says you left your first love. It's here, as we talk about love, that I need to hit the timeout button with some friends out there that maybe we've been doing life together for a while, several years. And I need you to allow me for 2, 3, 4 minutes to back up just a bit, because one of the really cool things about Radiant is that there's people that have been a part of Radiant the last 2 years that are new to the faith, that are still exploring the question of faith and Jesus and these ideas. And something that we may know and have talked about several times, they don't know. What is that thing? When you talk about love, particularly in the New Testament, you have to understand from our standpoint, because the New Testament was primarily written in ancient Greek, that for our one-word love in the English language, they had 4 words in the Greek. Some say more. Don would fight with me on that. Just be loving. I'm a C.S. Lewis fan. He said 4. I'll stick with that. But the point being, there's more than one word that we've all lumped into the English language. And when we ask what word is being used here, we need to know those 4 words. In other words, when he says, you have forsaken your first love, which one of those is he talking about? And what we discovered from that verse is the word he was using was agape love. If you have your fill-ins, I really encourage you to fill them out this week, because I want you to go back during the week and I want you to review this. I want you to pray about it. I want you to think about it. I think this is an important foundation for who we are as a church, to understand this. The love that Jesus is talking about here is agape love. That is the love of Christ. It is the love of the cross, sacrificial, fully surrendered kind of love. It's a unique love. The other Greek word out there is eros, which is sexual desire. Sometimes it's used in conjunction with lust, but it's also a good desire. I would say that in your marriage, it's good to have a healthy dose of eros in there. I signed up for it for that reason. It's okay. Sorry, my in-laws are here. It really was part of it, though. Sorry. Yeah, see? The next one is philia, and that's brotherly love. If you're familiar with the city in America, Philadelphia, it's called the city of brotherly love. Why? Philia, took from the Greek word brotherly love. That's where it got its name. And that brotherly love, we talk about a close relationship and openness. In our modern language, we'd say that's my best friend forever. That's my BFF. The last one is storge, which is natural affection. You say, what is that? That's the affection we're supposed to all have when we are raised, that looks at a puppy or a kitten and goes, aw, you know what I mean? It looks at a baby and our desires to want to protect and nurture that baby, right? That's just natural love that even just family members should have for each other. It's a baseline love. Not having that one in our culture has a word for it. Sociopath. That's what you lack that one. You're that. It's a baseline one you should just be born with. Why do I bring all this up? And I want you to be patient with me for just next few minutes, okay? I'm not looking to stomp on anyone's toes, but we've got to talk about cultural stuff sometimes. Because it happened to me again this last week, and it's probably happened to me 3 times, I'd say, in the last 4 or 5 weeks. Meeting with a young person, and they're frustrated not only with maybe my viewpoint, but the churches, and not just our church, but just many other churches as well, viewpoint on things like same-sex relationships and just marriage and things like that. And that's cool. Ultimately, the same question always kind of gets asked me. It's worded a little differently, but it goes something like this. Jason, isn't the Bible ultimately about love? Didn't Jesus tell us to love one another? And after all, aren't these just 2 people in a loving relationship? It's the questions I get, and totally fair questions. And by the way, yes. Isn't? Yes. Are we called to love one another? Yeah. Could 2 people be in a loving relationship? Yeah. The problem is this, and that's why I wanted you to understand those 4 words. The reason that conversation starts getting tense and it starts getting muddy is when we begin asking, but which Greek word are we using here? Right? That's ultimately what's happening. Which Greek word are you describing this love with? When Jesus says love one another, which one's he using? And you may stop and say, well, did Jesus say that? He did. Mark chapter 12, many of us know this verse already, but let's look at it. Love, and by the way, agapeo, that's the verb form of agape. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all of your mind, and with all of your strength. Then he says the second one is this, love, agapeo, your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. So Jason, isn't the Bible and didn't it tell us to love one another? You betcha. Which love is it? Agape. It's agape love. We are not called to mere friendship. He's not talking about just the basic love you should have for puppies and kittens. And to be clear, the love of Christ is not defined by our sexuality. It was demonstrated on a cross. Get your Greek words right. Fully surrendered, fully sacrificed, a prayer lifted up to heaven that says, not my will, but your will be done. When Jesus was talking to this church in Ephesus, that they had lost their first love, he was telling them they had lost their agape love. They had forsaken their agape love. And I think part of the reason we get so anxious and so upset out in our culture today is that we've just muddied up the waters with all kinds of weird definitions about love. And I think even in the church, we just kind of get confused because we have these misconceptions about love. And so with your permission, I'd just like to look at 3 of those misconceptions. It could be more, but let's just look at 3 of those common misconceptions that kind of cross my path more often than others do. And the realities in our culture today, the first one is many of us define love as tolerance. In our culture, what does that look like? It looks like, live and let live, right? Or the one that absolutely drives my wife nuts, which is you do you, and I'll do me. I may have said that accidentally a couple of times. I was referring to dinner, not love. Whatever floats your boat, right? Or, hey, what you do in private's your business. Let's just start with a basic working definition of tolerance. I think sometimes let's build from there, but I think let's just start with a good basic definition. Tolerance is simply allowing people to hold views from our own. Don't need to add to that. Allowing people to hold different views from our own. Where is then all the pressure and the anxiety and the anger coming from? And I'll tell you where it's coming from, because we've added to this definition. I'm a math guy, so I'll just put it in a simple equation for you on how I see it. Tolerance for me is respect. It's protecting the dignity of somebody else, their greatness. It's a level of civility. We don't have to agree on everything. And I can be okay that you have a different opinion on some things. Now, where has this broken down? It's broken down because here's the current equation from the culture. Tolerance isn't just respect anymore. I need you to affirm my behavior, and I need you to promote it as well. And this is what's causing all the problems. Someone added to your definition, and they didn't ask your permission, by the way. What used to just be, let's have a mutual respect that we're not always going to agree, became, no, I need you to affirm what I'm doing, and not just affirm it, I need you to celebrate it. Sing it from the rooftops. And if you don't agree with this equation, you are intolerant, and because you have defined love as tolerance, you are therefore unloving. You see how it works? You want to know how do I explain all of the anger? That's why. Others have reduced love down to feelings. We've talked about this one before. I feel it, therefore it, whatever it is, must be true. Because my feelings, after all, are valid. Because my feelings have never betrayed me. I don't know about you. I mean, can't we all just be friends? Can't we just get along? Loving means let's get rid of the negativity. Have good thoughts, good vibes. Most of you know this already. What's the problem with feelings? They come and go. Can't rely on them. And in a culture that is obsessed with happiness and pleasure, when those good feelings go, what do? Well, we just leave this and go find them somewhere else. We're on this constant chase of good feelings. There's nothing wrong with good feelings. What I'm saying this is they're a really poor thing to build a relationship on. If you build your relationship only on feelings, you or the other person in that relationship will eventually betray one or the other. It is not something to build a long-term relationship on. And so we cannot reduce love down to feelings. And last, many people refer to love as just basic decency in our culture. In other words, just be nice to each other, use your good manners, be polite. And to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with tolerance. There's nothing wrong with being nice or decent or civil with other people. My point, my argument is that these are baseline love. It's the low bar. These are basic things that we need to have a reasonable society. These are basics to just being a good human being. To be a contributing member of our society. But it may surprise you as I say this. These still are not the love Jesus is talking about when he calls you to agape love. They're the low bar. It is not the love he demonstrated for us. That's why I say Jesus' love transcends feelings of affection. It's exponentially harder than simple kindness, and it goes beyond basic tolerance. The point is this: people don't get crucified for being nice. Okay? There was something about the love of Jesus that angered the religious people so much they wanted him on a cross. And it wasn't just basic, hey, can we all just get along? This love is a higher calling. So what is this love that transcends mere friendship, sexuality, and common decency? I'll tell you it's this. It's a heartbroken, loving father looking out on the horizon, waiting for the prodigal son to come home. It's a genuine friend who's willing to break the rules of a religious day in order to heal you. Who's willing to touch the lepers to heal them. It's a love that invites sinners over to dinner and dines with them. That's agape love. Agape love is freely given and expects nothing in return. It is not transactional. You don't owe. It's just freely given. It's a love that forgives, next one, if you could, unconditionally forgives whether the recipient deserves it or not. We've talked about this one. It goes back to the first one. In other words, it expects nothing in return, not even an apology. You forgive because Jesus forgave you. Next one. It lays down its life for a friend. It puts other people's wants, needs, and desires above your own. Fully sacrificed, fully surrendered in service of our King. And the last one, it does what Jesus commands. John 15 reminds us, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. This is the love that Jesus taught. This is the love that Jesus lived. And this is the love that put him on a cross. There's absolutely nothing easy about this love. It's incredibly difficult and countercultural. Come on up, Nick. I want you to do an exercise with me real quick. Would you just close your eyes where you're at for a minute? I want you to think about people who have hurt you for just a moment. Or people you fear. Maybe people you despise. How about somebody you completely disagree with? I'll come right to the throat. How about that person that's on the other side of the Trump question with you? Live that out this week, huh? Think about those for a minute. And then I want you to imagine loving them unconditionally like Jesus loved you. They don't agree with you. You may not even like them. But can you love them unconditionally as Jesus loved you? Let's go even deeper with one more question. Would you die for them on a cross as Jesus died for you? Think about that one. The person you're angry with, that person you disagree with, that person that hurt you. Would you die on a cross so that they would know Jesus Christ eternally? That's the love we are being called to. Go ahead and look on up. When churches are launched, there's an excitement. New things happening. People are inviting. Lives are changed. Great things are happening. We love those new things. Shiny new coin. It's awesome. And then over time, that excitement wanes. Church becomes routine. They have to begin building systems and processes to make the long haul. And over time, what can creep in is we can forget our first love. What really matters. Or if you've ever seen a new Christian, you know they're on fire for the Lord. They just want to tell their friends and family. They're so excited. They want to get involved and do things. And then over time, church just becomes routine. Something you do. This church in Ephesus had great theology. They launched with a bang. There was an enormous excitement. Churches were planted. They worked hard. They persevered. They fought the good fight. But somewhere along the way, they lost and forgot their first love. And they allowed their hearts to harden. How about you? Was there a time you were really excited for Jesus? And do you still have that same excitement today? Fourth century theologian used to tell a story about the Apostle John. He said in his final years, he was crippled and blind. And so his disciples used to have to carry him into church and set him down. The elders always, towards the end of the service, would say, "John, do you have something to say?" And the disciple would look up and he would say, "My dear children, love one another." At one point, his disciples took him aside and they said, "Why is it every time they ask you, that's what you say?" And the Apostle John looked up at them and said, "Because if that's all we do, it will be enough." Listen, we don't always have to agree with each other to love one another. And I want you to know that if you don't disagree with me, I love you so much. Welcome to Radiant. And I want you to experience the love of Jesus, because when you experience that love of Jesus, it will transform your heart in such a way that you can't help but love others too. May we be known for our love, not always our agreement. And may we be defined by a cross, fully surrendered, fully sacrificed. May we love like Jesus.